Thank you, Jalon. Now you see some of the reason why we are so happy she's on board with our team. And as she said, one of the things that we're going to turn our attentions to next and immediately is really looking at some of the solutions that are out there in terms of research and policies and practices that are seeking to really change the landscape and make health a central piece of creating and sustaining and preserving affordable, healthy housing for all. I want to invite our panelists, David Fukuzawa, Doug Brugge, Bill Walsh, Jonathan Wilson, and Joel Gregory to come forward. And I want to introduce the moderator just briefly of this panel. David Fukuzawa is the managing director of Kresge's health program and has more than 20 years of experience in philanthropy with a special focus on vulnerable children and youth. We are very proud to call him our program officer and just thankful for the Kresge's Foundation support of our initiative and our events today. So without much more, I really want to ask David to come forward and the other panelists to join him as well. And let's share some of these insights in terms of research, policies, and practices that can really help us move forth with some of this question on how to make housing healthy, especially for low-income communities and communities of color. Thank you. David.
Thank you, Cecil. And I will return the favor in saying it's been a pleasure working with Cecil and Peggy and other members of the staff at We Act. And I'm so happy to be here today to help kick off this conference. So as Cecil said, the first session is to sort of like give a framework for some of the best practices going on that help define this field around health and housing. And I don't want to be so presumptive, to say that, it's the best work, although I think it's pretty good work, because I think a lot of what we're going to be hearing today from you out there in the audience and in the session today is in fact some of the best work going on not only here in New York City, but around the country. But I do think that what we can try to do is sort of set the stage or set a bar for how we begin to talk about these issues around health and housing. Today, we're going to be using this terminology about healthy, affordable housing quite a bit. And I just want to sort of back up and sort of reflect on that, because in this country, when we talk about housing, the dominant frame of the conversation is really not about health. Especially if we're talking about housing in a city like New York City, I think the mind immediately goes to issues around availability, affordability, the fact that so many people are being priced out of their homes, displaced in gentrifying kinds of neighborhoods. It's happening in cities across the country, in fact, across the globe. And so there's clearly a crisis around affordability, which the tip is simply the folks who are unable to have a home these days. So that's really how we begin to sort of see this problem. And in fact, when you go back in sort of history around housing policy in this country, what you hear is especially in the Housing Act of '49, that this country is sort of obligated to provide suitable and decent housing. And over the years, that has become affordable and decent, or decent and affordable housing. And I would argue that what has happened over the last half a century and more is that formulation around decent and affordable has really lapsed into simply affordability, and we've forgotten the decent part. And if you were to ask a person, well, what do you mean by decent? I would say that what we mean by decent is what we mean by healthy housing. And so I would ask us to be very conscious when we use that terminology about healthy and affordable. What we're really talking about is how housing policy has been framed in this country, and we're simply pointing out that the basis for that is really understanding how housing impacts health and livability. Worldwide, the McKinsey Global Institute has estimated there are 330 million households that lack affordable housing. But when they break that number down, it is broken down into 96 million folks. That's a financial issue, that they simply don't have the resources to cover the cost of housing. 234 million people live in substandard housing. So worldwide, the problem is not necessarily one solely of affordability. It's really a matter of health and livability. And so I just point that out because as we're talking about this, this is really part of a larger discussion that if we're going to really get at affordability, we need to go through it through the avenue of health. So with that, I just want to turn it over to the panel, and we're going to proceed in this order. Because the way we're framing this is really from the molecule to the policy level. Because we're going to be looking, Bill Walsh, who is the executive director for Healthy Building Network, and has been, I think, the founding director for over a couple of decades of this work. His work is focused largely on the materials that go into building, the products themselves, and the chemical components. And he'll be talking about what's going on in his sphere. And Joel Gregory comes to us all the way from the other side of the country in King County, which is Seattle, King County, which is the public health or the agency which covers that region around Seattle, and representing work that he has done on weatherization and healthy housing. And for those of you who know this area, know that King County has been one of the pioneers in this, and Joel is going to be providing us some of the lessons from that work in King County. And then Jonathan Wilson is the new acting director of the National Center for Healthy Housing, because the longtime executive director, Rebecca Morley, is moving on to another position. And so we're happy to have Jonathan because he's actually been quite a veteran there at National Center. And I know many people in the field were happy to see him step in, at least in the acting role. So we're going to be hearing from a policy dimension from him. And then Doug Brugge comes to us from Tufts University, and working on a project which actually Kresge is helping to fund, which sort of takes a view above the individual house to look at the neighborhood effects, especially of near roadway pollution and transit planning, and what effect that has on the health of housing. So we're really sort of trying to span this larger idea that housing is a basis for health by really looking at it from the very micro level to the very broadest kinds of levels, and to understand, that it's not only where people live, but the fact that people have been, especially low-income people, have been sort of forced to live in areas, through decades and decades of land use policies, racially based housing policies, either intentional or unintentional, that have actually put people in harm's way in multiple ways, not simply the fact that their housing may be substandard, but that they may be exposed to a greater level of toxicants in the environment. So with that, I'll turn it over to Bill.
Good morning. It's good to be here. Switch the order because the slides are in the other order, but I think it'll work fine anyway. I'm Doug Brugge. I'm a professor at Tufts Medical School, and my understanding is we're supposed to keep the talks very short. This is work that is complicated, and last night I talked for 2 hours on it, so we're going to cut it down by about 20-fold or something for this morning. But if there are people who are interested, I can give you more ways to learn more about it, including the website, which is down on the bottom here. And really all you've got to do is put CAFEH into Google, and our website comes up, and you can learn a whole bunch more about what we've been doing. Our focus is, our work is community-based participatory research. It has been from the beginning. This is a project that, there are a lot of projects that are CBPR, but this is, and I've done a lot of them, but this is the one where the community came to me and said, Doug, we want to work on this, and sort of convinced me and talked me into it and dragged me into it eventually, and now it's taken over my life. But this is a bunch of people on our team with the president of Tufts University in the middle there, Tony Monaco. And this happened because Tony approached me and said he wanted to meet my group, my research group. And I said, and I thought about that for a second. I said, it's not my group. We're more of a team. We're a collaboration, a coalition. And so I invited him over. We had lunch, invited all these people to come. And we had people from different universities, students at all different levels, community people, agency staff, and so forth, and educated him that CBPR is not, is not a professor with some postdocs and graduate students working for him. What we have done in the CAFE study, Community Assessment of Freeway Exposure and Health, and I'm condensing a huge amount of work into one slide here, but I just want to give you the picture, is we have measured and modeled something called ultrafine particles, which are produced by motor vehicles and are higher near heavy traffic. They're elevated near highways, major roadways, intersections in the downtown versus the suburbs. And we have modeled those across multiple study areas near and far from the highway in the Boston area. And on the left-hand side, you can see the map that came out of this. And I've frequently said, or I first said when this came out, that this almost made me cry. It was so much work when we got to this point that it brought a tear to my eye to see it actually materialize on a page. But the darker red are higher levels of ultrafine particles. Allison Patton's name is at the bottom. She did her PhD thesis doing this. And this is a very difficult task. Very few other people have done this. We're impressed on our own for having accomplished it, but as being a pesky little CBPR project, we're even more impressed with ourselves, I think. And her model, this shows annual averages, but her model is really an hourly model. So she can predict the level of ultrafine particles with some degree of error at 700 residences in our study area for every hour over a whole year. So 8,760 hours, different values for every year. And then we had another graduate student, Kevin Lane, who's mentioned here, who took those values, the ambient levels, and now I can't see any of you anymore with the lights on, but you can see me, so that's good. Took those ambient levels, adjusted them for people's behavior, their time activity, whether they're at home or at work, calculated something that we now call time activity adjusted particle number count, which is a personalized exposure to ultrafine particles. And what you see on the right-hand side here is the relationship between time activity adjusted particle exposure and C-reactive protein, a protein in the blood that's predictive of cardiovascular disease risk. And you can see that as people's exposure increases, their levels of CRP increase, which presumably would be associated with increased risk of cardiovascular disease. So and we think we're the first team that has done this. All right, so that's the background. And so, we're a CBPR project, so when we talk about doing research, doing an observational study, showing associations, our partners frequently sort of skip over that step and want to know what we're doing about it, how we're responding to it. And we've responded in multiple ways. We have some studies I won't talk about today about putting air filtration in people's homes to reduce particle exposure. But what I did want to talk about was our more recent work where we're looking at community-level tactics that would reduce the level of traffic pollution that people are exposed to in their homes. And this is Allison's effort again, summarizing what turned out to be 11 tactics and the literature on how effective those tactics are. And on the left-hand side, you see a column that has the tactics where there's good evidence for efficacy and that they will have a substantial benefit, and then moderate and inconclusive going to the right. And so filtration, in-home filtration, is probably what we focused on most, and and especially HEPA filtration. If there is a ventilation system, if not, then adding standalone air filtration units. The location of air intakes, if there is a mechanical ventilation system. Soundproofing, park location. You can see in the bottom left-hand corner the idea of keeping schools, homes, parks, playgrounds farther from highways, farther from busy roadways. Use of land buffers. These are the tactics that we think there's the strongest evidence for having a benefit. More moderate evidence, placement of building and park structures, trees and plantings, built or vegetative barriers. On the lower right-hand side, you can see some sound barriers next to a highway. Those can be somewhat protective of pollution exposure to people living immediately on the other side. Location of active transportation locations. This is something that we have been trying to push. We want to work with active transportation people. We want people running and walking and biking, but we'd rather there not be running and walking and biking right downwind from the highway, breathing in all this pollution and getting even a higher dose than the people who live there because their exercising and their respiration rate is high. Decking over highways, obviously a very expensive approach, but possibly effective. And healthy vegetables is another area we haven't looked at as much, but there's a lot of urban gardening. There's a lot of concern about the quality of soil in urban gardening. There hasn't been as much attention to how much air pollution from traffic near those urban gardens is depositing on the vegetation and being consumed and carrying with it a health risk. We held a charrette, which is a design term, which I didn't know until relatively recently, in May, where we brought together designers, environmental scientists, public health experts, community people, all sorts of folks, and considered two scenarios. A plan for locating a school right on top of the exit of a highway from a tunnel in Chinatown in Boston, and then another site in the city of Somerville, north of Boston, which is planned for housing right next to a major highway as well. And I just want to show this, not to go into detail about it, but this is a park near that Somerville site, and what the participants in the charrette did was redesign that park in ways to make it protective from the highway and major roadway air pollution. And they had, if you look in the upper left-hand corner, they added this berm around the park, which could be walked on, but would also serve as deflecting some of the air pollution. And then this band shell on the highway side, which would be a stage for performances, but would also be protective of people in the park by deflecting some of the pollution. So the goal here was not to think about what was practical or whether it was funding or anything like that. It was to think creatively, what would you do if there are no constraints to make something more protective? And then this is the school in Chinatown. You can see the large number of roadways. And then the red circle is where the proposed building, that would be two high schools, would be the largest high school in Massachusetts if it got built, right on top of the exit from the tunnel, which is a major source of air pollution, as well as all these roadways and the railroad, which I got on this morning to come here. And for that school, one of the features, you can see the designs over here on the right. One of the features that they did was to put the two schools on either side, and then this large enclosed atrium in the middle, which would have filtered air, so the kids could be sort of in a quasi-outdoor environment, but protected from the air pollution. So we're going to issue a report based on this work, probably in January is the plan now. And David, I have an advanced copy for you that I need to remember to give to you today. That was one of my goals. And certainly we'd like to circulate that more broadly and make people more aware. We have noticed that there's a lot of concern about green buildings and healthy housing and so forth, and there's a lot of focus on the inside environment, and we think that's appropriate. I spent a lot of time 10, 15, 20 years ago working on public housing and indoor environment. That's a legitimate problem, but very often the ambient environment and what gets into the housing isn't a part of, for example, the LEED certification process. So just to say, we're a very large collaboration, lots of community partners, city agencies, universities, and a bunch of funders behind a lot of this work. So thank you.
Doug, just before you depart, I think maybe just to help clarify, I know you and I know what this is about, but maybe say a little bit about the two communities and why the focus on that.
Right. So our focus on Somerville and Chinatown, we're working in some other communities as well, but for this work I'm presenting today, those two communities. Somerville, it's because they're a city that has been heavily impacted by transportation, and so there are environmental activists and community folks there who have been concerned about transportation, air pollution, and so forth for a long time. And they are the ones that, 7, 8 years ago, came to me and wanted to draw me into their work. So that's why Somerville. Chinatown, I had worked with for 20, 25 years, but not so much around traffic and air pollution issues. And when Somerville drew me into their orbit, I suggested, well, maybe we could bring some other communities that are heavily transportation impacted into our work, and approached a couple of organizations in Chinatown, and they were amenable, and so they joined in as well. So,
Great. Okay, thanks, Don.
My name is Bill Walsh. I'm the founder and the executive director of the Healthy Building Network, and our focus is on chemical hazards in building products. And we do a lot of work with the green building community, both in developing material standards within programs like LEED or the Enterprise Green Communities Guidelines. And we also work a lot with institutional building owners, architects and designers and specifiers to develop ways of selecting healthier materials for green building projects and all building projects. Obviously, this community is very familiar with one of the quintessential healthy building product issues, which is lead paint. And we also know from our experience with lead paint that by removing the hazard from the material, taking the lead out of the paint, we can see dramatic declines in the impacts of that material on people's health. And in this case, this chart shows the declining number of children with lead poisoning in New York City. The latest figures in this particular graph are just under 1,000. 1,000 too many, but still great progress from the 70s when this material started being regulated. What a lot of people don't realize is that lead was initially added to paint early in the 20th century because it was thought to really be a healthier product for wall covering, that the lead paint retained less moisture and therefore produced a healthier interior environment than other paints or than wallpaper coverings. And actually lead becomes kind of the beginning of a story of the methods that we have undertaken to improve the performance of our building products by adding synthetic compounds and chemicals and minerals to them without looking at the full range of impacts that these might have on workers, occupants, and communities. And wood is an excellent example of this. When we think of wood, we think of a sawmill and cutting down a tree and taking the timber into planks and refining into various products. But today, very little wood is simply wood anymore. And in fact, much of the wood that we use for our decking and playgrounds, et cetera, was until very recently infused with arsenic and other compounds, doubling the weight of the wood with the volume of the materials put into it, the chemical compound, creating an arsenic-treated wood formula. And much of what we think of as wood in our interior buildings now is actually a composite of using wood dust, wood fiber, and binding it with chemical binders, many of them based in formaldehyde. Both arsenic and formaldehyde are toxic compounds, carcinogens, and this is how playgrounds and decks became one of the largest sources of arsenic exposure to children because of the treatment of the wood, and how formaldehyde exposures became one of the largest sources of formaldehyde exposure to people became their interior environments because of the nature of how wood has evolved. But the story of the evolution of wood as a building product, like lead, also has a pretty interesting ending for us when we think about the conscious selection of our products and more consciously deciding how we create them, taking into account people's health. Because in 2003, our organization and many others launched a campaign to stop the use of arsenic in pressure-treated wood compounds because there were less toxic alternatives available. And the industry, in response to that campaign, voluntarily withdrew their request for permission to use arsenic in this manner from the EPA. And on this chart, you can see that happened right about 2003, 2004. And the use of arsenic dropped dramatically. 75% less arsenic is now used in this country. That's 75% less arsenic that that our children will be exposed to. 75% less arsenic that is going to make it into our landfills and ultimately into groundwater supplies from leaky landfills. Formaldehyde is also similarly very interesting. There have been efforts to reduce the use of formaldehyde in various building products for quite some time. And in 2007, the California Air Resources Board passed the strictest regulations in the country, limiting the way that formaldehyde gets used in all sorts of composite engineered wood products. And in this graph, you can see the yellow line is documenting the dramatic reduction in formaldehyde emissions from the factories and manufacturing facilities that produce those composite wood products around the United States. Because of the recession in 2008, where production of all sorts of building materials declined, we wanted to normalize that number against production figures. So the red line shows the U.S. production figures for the same period. And you can see, even accounting for reduced production, a very dramatic decline in formaldehyde emissions. And so what's great about this is that we're not only improving the built environment and the interior environment for people, but we're improving the factory environment for workers and the local community environment where those emissions are entering during the production process. That shows you the powerful driving forces of the building materials market, where such high volumes of these materials are used that when you make an improvement in any kind of a material, you're not only benefiting the occupants of buildings, but you tend to have a ripple effect all through the economy. The other thing that's interesting about the story of lead in all building materials, as I mentioned, lead was initially introduced as a health improvement, but even when the data began to show up in the 30s and 40s, that lead was associated with childhood poisoning, the industry continued to push forward its vision of lead as a healthy material. And we're seeing this happening today with things like chemical flame retardants, chemicals that are put on surfaces to repel water and repel stains, called perfluorocarbons, and antimicrobial chemicals that are being added to our product. All of these chemicals are under scrutiny by the EPA and other authorities because of the health impacts that are associated with them, sometimes at very low doses. And in the case of the antimicrobials, for example, no proof, in fact, contraindicators, that the antimicrobials are providing greater health protection to people. They may even be contributing to resistant strains of bacteria building up in our environments. But these are marketed consistently as healthy products without looking at these kind of impacts on people. So a chart from the EPA which attempts to show where flame retardants are found in the home could equally be understood as where endocrine disrupting chemicals and other health chemical hazards are found in the home, which is really pretty much ubiquitous. What we think of as fabrics and yarns in our carpet or coatings on our floors and furniture are really chemicals that have often not been fully tested for their impacts in human health, particularly with regard to children. Because we see many times that chemicals that have been removed from children's products, or products that are intended for children, are still permitted to be used in our building products and furnishings because they're not considered to be products for children. But yet when you really watch children in their environment, you see how intimate they are with these building products. The amount of time they spend on a floor, the amount of time they spend on carpeting, or the amount of time they spend on the fabrics of their bedding or their upholstered furniture. And so the chemicals that are found in the stain repellent treatment, in the flame retardant treatment, are chemicals that really need to be of concern to us. And we have the ability, we know that we can measure these, we know that we can find safer alternatives for these products even today, so we don't have to wait for the evidence to come in to show the harm that is to be documented in our children. We can act on the early warning signs that we have now and prevent the harm. And this is of concern. I mentioned endocrine disrupting chemicals. These are chemicals that affect the way our hormones function. They can have a wide range of effect, ranging from neurological issues to developmental issues to reproductive issues. The study of these chemicals is really only beginning. They're not that well understood, but some of the associations, and these statistics are taken from a report from the compiled by the World Health Organization in 2012. We do see that these, in a society that's getting generally healthier in many respects with regard to diseases, we see these certain diseases on the rise, and many of these have now been associated with these chemicals. So once again, it's really just a question of taking a look at how healthy can we make our interior environments, how healthy can we make our building products in order to reduce exposures to the chemicals that are associated with very serious diseases. We are just beginning really to work in concert with the affordable housing community. We're just starting to learn about a lot of the issues that you confront overall, and trying to make a contribution with regard to the building materials that we think can contribute to the overall effort to make our homes and communities healthier. And so during this conference and in the coming months, we are going to be meeting more of you and presenting new information that we think can contribute to this dialogue. A colleague of mine, Sarah Lott, is the author of a report we recently released looking at a strategy to prevent asthma through building product selection. She'll present the findings of this in a panel later today. We have this information and other information available to continue the dialogue about how to select healthier building products for affordable housing. And there are a lot more new tools that are just coming on the market. And in the commercial sector, these are getting quite an uptake. In fact, with new standards coming out to judge the healthfulness of market rate offices and homes. One is the Health Product Declaration, which is the first standard labeling for all building products that so we can actually know what's in our products. And online tools like our Pharos project to help evaluate the information that's now being made available to us for the first time. And some new initiatives. One that we have that is being funded by the Kresge Foundation is a roundtable of affordable housing developers and providers, in which we are going to start to work with people interested in these issues to take a deeper look at them and develop together some strategies for selecting healthier building materials for affordable housing developments in the future. Thank you very much for your time today, and I look forward to continuing the discussion.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be out here. My first time out to New York City, so it's pretty exciting. Hope I have some time to see around. In 2009, and between 2009 and 2012, we had a HUD, Healthy Homes grant, in which we were going to be looking at the impacts of weatherization and the community health workers. Dr. James Krieger couldn't be here today, so he threw my name in the hat, and here I am to talk about the weatherization and community health worker combination. We did a webinar on the Asthma Community Network about a couple months ago, and that's available. The expanded version of this slideshow is available on their website. So the purpose of the study, since about 2000, Dr. Krieger has been doing community health worker kind of education in the communities with different populations. And they've been having a lot of success doing that. And then it's in the weatherization world, Department of Energy, which funds our program, has been looking at a weatherization plus health program. And so we decided it was time to combine the weatherization work that we do that has a lot of impact on people's health and energy efficiency with a community health worker. There was a prior study that we did a comparison study with in 2002 with a similar population that we had. We ended up working with a school district in southwest King County, a small school district that had a high population of poverty and a high population of children with asthma. So it was great working with the school district because they had all the records of all the students that had asthma. They had the medications at the schools for the children, so they could, we knew who to work with, and so they gave us their names to work on. So the community health worker does about, in our program, they were doing about 3 to 5 home visits throughout a year, working with the families. They worked a lot with education. One of the things that I noticed in their education was that the people didn't understand how to do their medications for asthma. So they were doing a lot of emergency medications when they didn't really need to. They needed the day-to-day work. That had a huge impact with the families that we worked with. They worked a lot with the children, directly with the children, and then their caregivers. If they needed assistance in getting some other primary care or other care, other social needs, then the community health worker was there to give that kind of support. The community health worker, like the weatherization worker, are the ones that go into the homes. They do the counseling with the people. They answer the questions. In our program, we worked with 3 community health workers. 2 were bilingual in Spanish and English. 1 was bilingual in Vietnamese and English. So the initial, I guess the study that was done in 2002 worked with English-speaking, Spanish-speaking, and Vietnamese-speaking populations. And so in order to do a comparison, those are the populations that we worked with. So the community health worker can come out of the community, a trusted member of the community that they're working with, and they can provide wonderful services. And we did cross-training, so the community health workers were trained in what we were doing in weatherization, so they understood when they went into the home what we were going to be doing and can help us communicate with the families while we were there. Typically, the people aren't nurses when they're hired to be a community health worker, but King County Public Health has developed a training program for community health workers. So the outcomes that we saw when we were doing weatherization work in the homes, as well as community health education, we saw the symptoms decrease, and during the year that we were going into the home, I could see very dramatically the changes that were occurring in the house. In the weatherization program, part of what we do is education about training people how to use their ventilation. People that, everybody lives in some sort of a home, and a lot of people just live in the home, get up, turn on the lights, turn on the heat, it comes on, it goes off. And they don't really use the home as a tool. My perspective of doing weatherization for over 22 years is that people, in order to make it a healthy home, need to learn how to use the home and make it work for them. So we do a lot of training with people about how to use ventilation, turning on fans, opening windows, seeing how air moves through the house, a lot of education about moisture, mold, and that sort of thing. So we saw a lot of differences. Changes happen in people in the quality of their life. The caretakers' knowledge increased. They knew more how to work with their children, understanding the medications, understanding how to use the house to make it a healthy environment. And the triggers decreased. Part of the reason that the triggers were decreasing was that we were warming surfaces. So if the walls were not insulated and there was mold forming on the walls because of moisture that forms there, we would insulate the walls, warm that surface. We were doing air sealing, so we weren't getting the dust and the fumes coming up from the crawl spaces or from the attics coming down into the homes. We insulated the floors, the ducts, walls, and ceilings. Ventilation, we were adding fans, or we were replacing old fans that weren't working correctly. We had to meet the ASHRAE 62.2 requirements of providing the correct amount of ventilation. Some people think it's too much kind of ventilation, and so tenants tend to put a sock in the fan, and I'm sure the people who go into homes see that. If the fans are loud and they don't use the fans, they don't feel a need to have that sound going on. And we were putting insulation in those areas. So we were adding to the energy efficiency of the home and also making it a little more healthy house for them. Some of the interventions we did, we removed wood stoves from homes. We did the full-blown weatherization. So what that means also, heating system overhauls where we would replace furnaces and water heaters that were backdrafting, and we provided the correct amount of ventilation in the fans so that we weren't creating backdrafting situations. The picture on the slide is of our friend the roach in one of the houses, and then the community health workers, the woman in red and the one nearest the camera, were community health workers, and they would go in and teach people how to clean their kitchens, how to clean their houses. So it was directly getting down and dirty with the families that were there. We would take out old carpet and put in new level loop, low VOC carpeting. So when the children would walk in the bedroom that had 30-year-old carpets in an apartment that had been lived in by many other people, and dogs and cats and food spills and all sorts of stuff, they would realize that there was fresh air back again, because when it would be hot out, the carpets would exude the fumes, and when it would be wet and rainy out, the carpets would exude the fumes when they would come in. But with the new carpeting, they were able to breathe easy. It was quite remarkable to see the changes that happened. We did some mold removal, and then of course the ventilation was very important there. I talked about the community health workers. We had the weatherization has an intake person, so the people would apply to King County Public Health, and then they'd have to qualify for the weatherization program. So that was 125% of poverty, federal income guidelines up to 60% of area median. And then we had the Healthy Homes auditor and inspector, which was me, and the energy auditor, which was me, going into the houses and taking dust samples, looking at educating the people doing the work in there. The National Center for Healthy Housing, they were the data analysts. They were the quality control, quality assurance to make sure that when we were out doing the work, we were doing it correctly. We also had it slips me, a hospital working with us. Just making sure that we were following the guidelines that are necessary when you're doing a study working with children. And then we worked with contractors. So we did training of contractors to understand where they were, what they were doing, who their clients were, and why they were there. And then the all-important school district nurses that worked with us, they gave us the names of the people and did education at school with the students. So these are just a couple of pictures of things that we found, unconnected plumbing under showers that had just been installed not too long before. And then we had dust and crawl spaces, and we were doing some dust sampling. The part of the results of what we found was the caregiver quality of life increased dramatically, partly because the children weren't going to the hospital, they weren't getting sick at night, and they were going back to school again. So the triggers were decreased, and the Weatherization Plus community health worker results, everybody in the study was uncontrolled to start out with in both of the studies, and we found these results were wonderful to do. So in conclusion, we did find coordination between the weatherization organization and a public health community organization. You will find increase in health of the children who have asthma. It's a wonderful thing. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me today. And what I'm most excited about with this conference, it is a solution-based conference. Often before I was the acting director, most of my life was spent at the organization working on research. And we often go to research and conferences, and we don't really talk about the solutions. We talk about what we're learning now and not really transferring it to what people can use on the ground. So this has been great so far. We've heard some research, but it has been solution-based. And I'm really excited about this afternoon. There are solutions out there. We're moving forward in healthy homes. And I'm going to give you just a flavor, but I think that what you're really going to get is from this afternoon talks and trainings. They're going to be fantastic. It's just too bad that there's so many great people and so many overlapping things. You can't get to all of them. But hopefully you'll see who's on the agenda and look out for them, because they are real leaders. They know what they're doing, and you should seek them out if you can't get to their session and find out what they're doing. Just talking about a few of these solutions. Home repair programs have been the backbone forever of making our homes healthier. And they are learning from research, they're learning from what's going on. And I'll say a few more words about this later in my presentation, but we have to thank them for being the core, starting this off. In the housing construction and renovation world, Bill talked about LEED and U.S. Green Building Council pushing forward with better products. And in the affordable housing world, we have to tip our cap to enterprise community partners who, over 10 years ago, created their green criteria that has been adopted in many low-income housing tax credit deals. It's amazing that in this country that affordable housing is not being funded primarily by HUD and our housers, but actually by the Treasury Department through tax credits. And what we find is that if we can get into these tax credit deals and make sure that they are adopting green policies and healthy policies, we can really have an impact on the development of affordable housing in this country. In 2015, Enterprise will be coming out with their next version, and in that version they'll be talking more about resiliency, something that's been helped by the problems with Sandy here in the city, but also because of work that Bill's been doing around products, and they're moving forward with a products focus of how can we make sure that the products that are going into new construction and substantial renovations are better. So this is a great progress, and thanks to Bill and everybody at Enterprise for moving that forward. Joel just talked about weatherization. Weatherization has been thinking about the intersection of how they may be impacting people's health for a long time. Since the 1980s, when people are complaining that they were tightening up houses too much and they were making people sick. So it's not a new thing for energy. But as we've been moving in our healthy homes world, we didn't always recognize that. And with the support of folks like GHHI, we've made sure that comfort is a major part of what we're talking about when we move forward with our healthy homes agenda. And thinking about all the things we have to do, energy efficiency is critical. Around property maintenance, there's a great session. I don't want to lead anybody to one or the other this afternoon, but there's one that the New York City Health Department and LIST New York and others have been working on, 2 shades of green, which looks at property maintenance and considers the impacts of things like smoke-free housing, integrated pest management, water conservation, so that we are making a holistic house that is safe and healthy for our children. These are not easy things to talk about, especially smoke-free housing, where people have been smoking all their lives, and what do we do about that? But they're tackling these problems, they're moving forward, they have solutions, and so I hope that not everybody goes to it, because there's other great sessions, but hope some learn from what they're doing with 2 shades of green. And then in the healthy community development world, I had a great talk with a developer in Silver Spring, Maryland, just the other day. And it's no longer that we're just talking about affordability, what David was talking about. This developer is talking about thinking about resiliency, thinking about making sure that they're using fuel cells on the property so that if there is a problem, they have their own power. But beyond that, thinking about food insecurity, talking about farm to table, And you wonder, how is that part of affordable housing? But they're actually having a special kitchen within the development. This is a mixed income, mixed use development. And they are providing services so that residents can come down and learn how to cook healthier within the development. They're talking about the best products they can put into this development. This is real. This project will get off the ground in the next year. And it's not just a dream anymore. It's actually in the affordable housing world, and we're making progress. So this is fantastic. These are the solutions that all the hard work over the last 20 years is paying off. And I must congratulate people in the room who've been working on it. Those who are new to this movement, we're at a great stage. And so keep up the good work. There are emerging tools that I'd like to talk about, some that we at the National Center for Healthy Housing are working on, around property maintenance standards, around proactive code enforcement, around open data. With the support of Kresge, this past May, we released the National Healthy Homes Standard, Housing Standard, which there is currently an international property maintenance code that's part of the code process. It's focused mainly on safety, and it's a process to change. It's difficult to do. It's a consensus process, and it's difficult to get new ideas through the code officials who sit on those panels. So we came together and worked with many others, many advisors, to come up with a healthy housing standard that raises that bar to say that it's not just good enough that you have certain safety conditions and fire safety in buildings, but that they should be healthier, and that you should consider the pest maintenance in the property. That you consider what's coming off of the products in the building. And it's a code that's out there that can be adopted in many different ways. It can be used if you already have something that's a sanitary code, to strengthen that code, to get ideas on how it can be improved. It can be adopted in entirety as a new sanitary code for your community. It could be, if you already have the IPMC, adopted in part or in whole to overlay on top of that. Or if your community is not willing or able to move forward with new codes at this time, it could be adopted by different representatives of your community. It could be an organization that would say that our standards, anything we build to, will be built to this standard, or renovate maintenance to this standard. We have a separate building code, but as far as maintenance goes, our buildings will be maintained to this standard. And it just should be a way of doing business, that even if you're an individual property owner, you should be asked by your residents, by the community, that this is the standard that you should be using, and moving forward with that. As part of codes, historically in this country, we've been reactive. It's been a complaint-based system, where when somebody complains that they have a problem with their neighbors, that there's rats, there's trash, something else going on, there's broken windows, grass is growing too high, that the code folks come out and take care of it. There's now movement, and documented by Change Lab Solutions, to make sure that this is a proactive system. And there are cities that are starting to adopt this, that in San Francisco, in San Diego, in Greensboro, North Carolina, that instead, and I believe partially in Rochester around lead, that we are not going to wait for the problem to be called out, but actually that on a regular basis, people will go to homes, code officials, and check to make sure they are up to code. And hopefully it's a healthy housing code that they're looking at, but it's a code and making sure that everybody's have the same playing field, that as far as where they can live, and that they're not getting better service or less services from where they may be living or who they may be. It's a critical point, and something that we really need to think about. But this has been a success. And in Greensboro, it's been documented that over the 7 years of the program, from the beginning to the end, there are now 77% code violations identified because they're getting out in front of it and making sure that the problems are being solved in advance and not waiting for them to emerge from complaints. But in other communities, we may not get that far. And there are opportunities through a new vehicle that National Center for Healthy Housing is working on with others. It's called the Housing Checkup. And it is intended to be sort of your Yelp of code violations, so that you can go online and find out what's going on in your community. We see this as a great activist tool. This is something where you can see, are there real problems in my community that are not being addressed? Because I know, because the code folks, for some reason or another, are not coming. Or is this an area where there's serious issues, but there's not enough resources coming into my neighborhood to address them properly? And it can be a rallying call. It can be a tool to really move things forward. And while it's not online yet, this is an emerging tool. So you can go to this website now and you'll just learn about it, but you won't be able to use it yet. We are signing up cities now into the House Facts system that will say that they pledge to have open data in their community that will be put into the system, and so that when they have code violations notified, we'll have that so that people can use it to make progress in their communities. So those are some emerging things that I really want to get across to you. But I also want to talk, just to get a little perspective on the last 15 years and where we're going. These are two folks that we have worked with. Irma, who lives in the Arlington section of Northern Virginia, and Garlinda, who lives in Anacostia in Washington, D.C. Both of them are older women, senior women, wise women who are very strong-willed. They are strong in their communities. They know what they want. They were very clear when we talked to them about their issues in their housing, what they needed, and we listened. And they both have grandchildren who have asthma, who spend a lot of time in their homes. And it was a great concern to them to make sure that when we were doing work in those homes, we were not ignoring that. Now for Garlinda, she lived in a home that she admittedly said it was not her top priority, was that. It was actually the safety. There were shootings, there were drug deals, there were things going on in that home that needed much more attention. And so we need to meet people where they are and recognize that sometimes when we go in, health is not their number one priority. But if we can get past, I mean, health is safety, safety is health. So I put it together. But for them, in Garlinda's neighbors, they wanted to make sure that this was a safe building. And so working with CPDC in New York City, in Washington, D.C., they made sure that was the first thing they worked on. And then making sure that they had the amenities they needed was important. But moving forward, we worked with them. For Irma, it was a program that Rebuilding Together, which was honored earlier, recognized that they needed to do more about health and safety. And so they took the steps when they were treating in the home that Irma couldn't treat because her husband had passed and she didn't have the resources to move forward, to make sure that what they were doing in Rebuilding Together's volunteer practices and repair program was healthy. And for Garlinda, it was making sure that when they were doing renovations and rehab that was funded by HUD, that those renovations and rehabs were done at a higher level than was done 10 years ago, that health was respected, that the asthma issues were respected, that pesticides were not going to be used, that pest control was going to be properly made, that the products that were going into that unit were going to be done well, the ventilation was going to be proper. And we see this as a great success. And solutions are out there. We're moving forward. And we're excited about moving to the next level with you all in the future. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank our panelists for doing exactly what I thought they would do, which is help sort of frame the conversation. And, you know, to this I would only just add that, rather than think about this as 4 separate ways to think about health and housing or healthy housing, that there are people like Irma and Gerlinda in these homes, and they are in fact exposed, and their children, to all of these things, plus whatever is going on in the neighborhood and in the schools. And there's a cumulative impact of all these various environmental assaults on folks. And so we have some time for questions, and so, if you have some questions, I believe there will be some roaming mics that Cecil and some others are going to be passing out. So, please raise your hand if you have them. I'm just going to start off, though, with a question, because this conference, after all, is organized by We Act, which is considered not only here but nationally one of the leading environmental justice entities in the country. So, what is what you have to say? What does this have to do with people in low-income communities, and why should this matter? Anyone want to?
Is this on? Or is this, yeah, it's going, okay. For what I talked about, the traffic pollution, the point is that low income and racial and ethnic minority community populations are more likely to be to live in locations that have heavy traffic, near highways, near major roadways, et cetera. So there's an intersection. It's a little bit complicated because there is a move now for transit-oriented development where some high-income housing is also being situated in high transportation areas. But overall, across the country and in most locations, there's a socioeconomic and a racial disparity in terms of traffic exposure.
Certainly for building products, in many respects, it's fundamentally an environmental justice issue in a number of respects. First is, as healthier building products are introduced into the marketplace, they tend to cost more and they tend to be put into the higher income apartments and homes and offices. And so one of the unintended consequences of the green building movement actually is creating a two-tiered system of increasingly healthier products available to those who are willing to pay a premium for that, just like with organic food or anything else. And the rest of us have products that have not been improved, even where improvements really could be made. And by creating economies of scale, we have a solution not only for all people, but really for the overall environment. And the second thing to think about in terms of building products is the occupants are exposed to only one phase, but those products came from somewhere, and they're going to go someplace after their useful life in the building. And those tend to be communities that are lower income communities, the manufacturing communities, and the host of disposal site communities. And so the more that we can get the toxics out of the building materials, the less impact on communities all along the life cycle of those building materials.
And just to say the weatherization program, the focus is the low-income families, and the housing repair programs that we work with the community development block grant funding focuses on homes where people don't have the income to be able to do the repairs on their homes, and so they're able to get the repairs done so that they can stay in their homes a lot longer. And with the energy efficiency work, people can afford to stay in their homes.
And following up on what Doug said, you can go down the line. You can look at asthma rates. You can look at lead poisoning rates. And the issues of disparities by income, by race, are all along the line. You can see that. And this is an issue that we can't ignore. And the process is to be looking at the activism and things like the housing checkup to make sure that people have the tools to move forward.
Okay, so we have a question in the back, Jonathan, who?
Thank you. Hi, my name is Javier Sepulveda. I live in public housing, and I've been in litigation with New York City Housing Authority for past 3 years to get repairs. My daughter has asthma, and I had a serious mold condition. My story was featured on Dateline NBC, by the way. My question is for Joel Gregory. Working with housing authorities, they required under their lease to be responsible for ventilation. In regards to your program for weatherization, how does that factor? I've had a problem with getting them to respond to addressing the ventilation issue. They don't clean the ductwork, or they don't even seem to have such a program. So are you familiar with the New York City requirements?
Not at all.
Not at all? Okay.
But in our housing authority, my program focuses on privately owned mobile homes and single-family homes with the weatherization work. The King County Housing Authority does have a program where we're doing rehab work on the homes, and we are looking at the ventilation specifically, because weatherization now is partnering with the regular housing authority work, and so we're able to focus on there. So I would suggest hooking up. I'm seeing what your housing or the weatherization programs do. I don't know anything about.
And to be clear, we will have the New York City Housing Authority here today as well. So we'll definitely get back to that question. Yes, ma'am.
My mother owns a brownstone from like the 1930s. So if I inherit it, like, do you recommend that I just renovate it with like more organic materials, or just leave it like is? Materials with, healthier materials.
Yeah, it depends on what materials are in place, which it may have different, for example, if there was paint that's never been painted over or removed, it could very well be lead paint from before the 1970s. So it depending on exactly what has happened within the house over the course of its life, it could have newer materials or older materials. That depends. You really have to take a look at the individual cases. Now, a lot of the housing stock that's older, an organization that I work with in Washington, D.C., for example, they did a deconstruction of public housing in Washington, D.C. that was being replaced. And the materials they took out of there were quite amazing. Every unit had hardwood red oak flooring, for example, which would be a very healthy solution for a home instead of carpeting, for example. So it really depends on exactly what's in there, and I'm happy to talk with you, after this session about what you're looking at.
We've got another question over here. And then.
My name is Kofi Berko Jr. I have two questions. The first one has to do with...
You're only going to get one.
Oh.
Sorry.
Oh, okay. Well, I think the first one
with
is
lots of love.
Important. I'm wondering why the federal government is not part of the panel. HUD, for example, controls, directly or indirectly controls about 80% of the houses in the nation. And they have an office for lead hazard control and healthy homes, and do a lot of work related to issues that we're discussing here. And I was wondering why they weren't on the panel.
We invited HUD, and they did not come. If he is from HUD, then we'd be happy to point questions to you. But we did send an invitation to the secretary and to the offices, but they declined to come. So that's the answer. You and I can talk later. I got to move on. Question?
Just a comment, Deborah Nagin from the New York City Department of Health. I think that I really like to echo what Jonathan was saying around we have solutions, because I think that building materials actually are really important, but I think for all of you, there's amazing amount of data that we have, the health department has, and is data from HPD on housing quality and health. And what we really know is that disparities in housing quality are really the explainers, especially around asthma, as to why we have disparities in asthma across neighborhoods, where poor neighborhoods are really having higher rates of asthma, and it's because of exposures, especially around pests. And we have failed solutions around using pesticides rather than fixing hazards. So I think that in addition to good materials, we buy that, we agree with that, one of the things that we really need to struggle with is how to really try to get housing quality, better maintenance of housing, so that you don't have pests in your home, so you don't have moisture and mold, and so you have things like no smoke-free housing. So I think it's a great opportunity now. We have solutions that work, as Jonathan pointed out, and we need to figure out ways to incentivize them so they really happen in our housing, and so people can expect their housing to be healthy.
Thank you. Anybody want to respond?
You're exactly right. And there's just a kind of an interesting thing. Cincinnati Children's Hospital did a study of their children with chronic asthma, and they did also like an income gradient or neighborhood gradient. As you can expect, and here are the neighborhoods with the poorest folks, and here are the wealthiest neighborhoods, and they overlaid the asthma cases, and it was kind of pretty much a straight line correlation. And so anyone who would want to argue that this is a behavioral issue would have to kind of say, well, the data would suggest otherwise. And what that says is that this problem is a housing issue, but it's a health issue. It's also an educational issue insofar as those children are not in school. It's one of the biggest causes also of early, especially in the early grades, of absences. So, it's an argument for a different kind of investment in housing, is I guess your point, and I would hardly agree. I believe that we're sort of at the end of our time, unless there's a burning question or a burning point. Doug?
Can I just add one point here? Because I started out in working on housing conditions and asthma, and the work that I alluded to earlier was about ambient air pollution, but particulate pollution. So asthma is a legitimate concern. It's a major concern in children. But it has been a worry of mine that in the housing and in the environmental health world, there is not much attention being paid to cardiovascular disease. And cardiovascular disease is the major health outcome in adults from these exposures, especially from particulate pollution. And the numbers are not trivial, from secondhand smoke, from traffic pollution, from wood fireplaces, et cetera. And in the United States, just from ambient particulate matter, the estimate is 100 to 200,000 deaths a year. And globally, the estimate is over 3 million deaths a year from ambient particulate matter. So I'm just making a little pitch in this audience, which is well grounded in asthma and has a good grasp on that, to consider the older adults and the cardiovascular outcomes, because I think there's an additional health concern that is substantially important that also needs some attention.
So thank you, Doug. I think we're at the end of our time.
One more.
Okay, one more question.
Hi guys, Ellen Tone. So I'm hoping for a rapid fire response to this question. If you could pick only one, local advocacy thing that could be done. You're talking to a group of folks from New York City, right? What is one thing that you think would be quite impactful that people could push for at a policy change level, since obviously we're not going to see a tremendous amount of leadership sort of at the federal level, and a lot of these housing decisions occur locally?
Rapid fire.
Go first.
You guys lose.
When it comes to materials, looking beyond VOCs to other types of chemicals that are coming off the products that can trigger asthma.
And VOCs are?
The VOCs are the volatile organic compounds, chemicals that are gases at room temperature.
Thank you.
I would go for an integrated pest management program.
Additionally to those, I would say ventilation, cleaning fans, cleaning ductwork, and putting fans in
Rapid
all
fire.
the time. Okay?
And I would add to ventilation, good filtration on the ventilation that brings in outside air, that filters it effectively to reduce the ambient pollution that's brought in.
Okay, we have one burning last thing.
Joel Cuff from the New York Environmental Law and Justice Project. I think one component that's missing is enforcement. These conferences have been going on and on and on, and it's been really good. But without enforcement, all the bad guys continue to do this, no matter how much educational material.
Thank you. And we'll have an opportunity to talk more about enforcement.
Okay. I want to ask you to join me in thanking our panelists for helping to start off the conversation today and for staying within time.